there.
Hi, Eva.
So here we are at my next interview, and this is episode 36 on my channel. And this is my cousin, Jackie Hull, one of the many McCollum family members who's in the teaching business, or at least has been. So I thought it'd be nice to talk with Jackie about what she experienced as a public school teacher and her area, and see if there was any advice she could give teachers that they might enjoy. So, Jackie, what do you have to tell us?
Well, I started off uh, teaching general ed, fifth grade, which, by the way, that was my first job. Um, by the way, that's what the majority of the 26 years my mom taught was fifth grade. So my
Wow.
mom was a teacher, my dad was a teacher and a coach, and I found out that my dad's mother, my grandmother Stratton, was a teacher, but for a very short time. But she actually went through the schooling they had at that time, which I think was just a year maybe back then. But and then she taught a year, and that was it. So, but anyway, I do have to say, because I've been thinking a lot about it going back to the beginning, but my bachelor's was in psychology. And then I went back to New Mexico State for the grad work and teacher's license, all or teacher's, what do you call it?
Certification.
Certification, yeah.
Yeah.
Combined into one. And I have to say that no professor ever discussed the fact that all of your students are not sitting in their desks ready and eager to learn all day long. And I don't remember any of them discussing accommodating for students' needs. So this would have been in about 1984 or 1985. I can't remember the exact year I went to school with. Probably the fall semester was 1984. I don't remember them discussing behavior problems. Um, and and learning disabilities. Maybe they mentioned it occasionally, but I do not remember. So my first job was teaching at Holloman Air Force Base, and many of those students were not the officers' children because they lived in Alamogordo. The the lower ranks lived on base in barracks or family housing. And back at that time, the Air Force transferred them a lot of times, like every couple of years, 2 or 3 years. And so many of my students were behind, and I honestly didn't know how to deal with it. I really didn't. Um, I I didn't have the training. I guess I didn't have the creative mind or astuteness to think, well, here's what I'll do. Here's how I'll set up the classroom. Uh, to be honest with you, I thought, I'll present the lesson and then they'll do it.
Yeah.
And some of them at fifth grade couldn't add 3 plus 4. They really had a math disability. Some of them couldn't read. And I remember trying some different things like teaching the lesson and then telling the students that were way behind in math, uh, you know, do the first problem. When you're finished, call me over and I'm going to tell you if it's right or not. And if it's not right, I don't want you to feel badly. Let's figure out what you did wrong. But there were so many of them, I ran out of instructional time. It was really anxiety producing for me and for them too. But anyway, I taught at Holloman for 2 years, or was it three? I think it was 3 years. No, just 2 years. And that was, I tried to figure things out. I remember enjoying greatly reading to them right after lunch, which is something you can do for elementary students, even at fifth grade. And I have very fond memories of reading them The Secret Garden. And because they would come in from lunch on a hot, dusty day like we're having today here at my
Yeah.
house, and they'd just really be tired. And I'd give them, 15 or 20 minutes of just sitting in their desk. They could scribble if they wanted. And they did all pay attention. Even if they were sleepy, some of them may have just zoned me out, but I maybe tried to be a little bit of an actress because I remember using the English accent when, because this took place in England. And boy, they love that. So I remember that with fondness. And there was a time when no learning disabilities affected them and their listening. And it made me feel good because they just thought I was so cool I can't remember the exact line, but I would say, please, sir, that part. Might I have a plot of land? But so I have very good memories of that. Then my husband graduated from college while I was still teaching and got a job in Texas. And we moved there. And by then I'd had my son, who was a year old. I taught his first year of life and moved to Texas, and I got to stay home with them. And then maybe the next year I started, I still had the desire to teach or, to get out of the house. And I taught preschool, or it was more like daycare with
Mhm.
3-year-old, 2 and 3-year-olds at a private church, Mother's Day out. So I did that 2 days a week part-time, but it kept my foot in the door of education. And then while I was there, I got my um, endorsement in special ed. And I did learn a lot in that program. That was at University of Houston, Clear Lake. And I remember learning a great deal there. Really great program. And of course, there's always a shortage of special ed teachers. And for a while, I was a substitute teacher. And then finally, the kids were in school, so I applied. And my first job was in Pearland, Texas, teaching in a school that was middle school. I think that back then they still called it junior high. I'm certain of it.
I still
This
call it
junior
junior
high
high.
had just seventh and eighth graders,
Mhm.
I think. So just seventh and eighth graders. And I worked on a team. So the teachers for each subject and I were a team, and we would just schedule when I would go in their room and help their students out. But that was also really difficult to have seventh graders maybe reading on the third grade level. So, how do you accommodate them? Back then, we used to say modify the lesson, and then I had a meeting after I moved here to New Mexico, and that was a big no-no. We don't modify, we accommodate. And I was like, what? I don't get it. But anyway, I would accommodate them, not modify. So, and I remember I would meet, especially for a reading class, the teacher, different teachers also you discover when you're a special ed teacher working in that kind of program or model of special ed, different teachers are more accommodating and knowledgeable about how to work with students with special needs. So the um, language arts teacher had a program on computer where they were supposed to read books of their choice that I guess she had a classroom library, and then take a quiz on it, a comprehension quiz and vocabulary and all that on the computer. My students just always failed, my group of students. And so I met with them before class or before school started. A lot of them went to the cafeteria. When they got off the bus, they all had to go to the cafeteria, and some of them ate there, some of them didn't. But I would gather them all up, take them to my, what we called they called it the dorm, that first school. The
Yeah.
dorm was 5 different special ed teachers all had desks in there. It was like a classroom converted to the special ed department. And I took them there, and it did have, they had just a partial, one of those wall things you set up, and a round table. So I'd take them in there and discuss the chapter. I'd even read it out loud to them and point out vocabulary words and try to help them that way. I was always frustrated throughout my career because there just was never enough time, never to help them. And I used to daydream, especially when I had that just general ed 5th grade. I used to daydream and fantasize is a better word about just having a very small group to work with. And I always thought if I just had the money, I'd open a private school where I only had 5 or 6 students, maybe even 10, but not 27. Like I had my first year, 27 fifth graders, and no EA, no nothing to help with all those different levels, and no knowledge back then either. But
So young, so
anyway,
inexperienced, really. Very inexperienced too. I mean, those
yeah,
first couple years, they're tough. They're really
yes,
tough.
yeah,
But you didn't end up staying in Texas, right? You eventually moved to Rio Rancho, didn't you? Did you
yes,
work in the Rio Rancho school district?
yes. Hmm. At an
And
elementary
how,
school.
oh, okay. How was that? Was it a
That
good?
was, yes, very, very good experience. My first teaching year in Rio Rancho, all my years were at elementary level. My first teaching year was kindergarten, which, boy, that was something that those kindergarten teachers and first grade, God bless them, because, the kids come to school. Some of them cry the first week or two because, they've never been away from mommy or daddy or both. And a lot of them maybe haven't developed some of the social skills or experiences that they need to get along with. And I think that year we had 30 kids, but we had 2 EAs. We had some pretty um, severe special needs, or kids with special needs that needed, a constant EA. But that was really wonderful. And I do feel like I always was good at collaborating with the classroom teacher and never try to be bossy or tell her what to do. I was always willing to be, second in line to the planning and that sort of thing. And of course, I would pitch in if the teacher wanted. And that year, I had a young teacher that I worked with that was super friendly, and we had such fun too. We even socialized, but we had a big classroom full of kids with behavior problems, both special needs and no special needs, and which is, I think, just the norm for kindergarten, but a lot of fun. They still had nap time in
Neat.
kindergarten, so you could actually get something done. I'll say a side note is when I was a substitute teacher, I subbed a few times at elementary, but mostly secondary. And I know you taught secondary, your brother taught secondary, your nephew teaches secondary and
Yeah.
college level. Elementary teachers generally are not treated with the professionalism of secondary teachers, and they're just asked to do so much out of maybe just the love of the children. You know, they spend so doggone much time doing bulletin boards, decorating the doors for Christmas, all that kind of stuff. And then you're stuck doing duty. You are not paid a stipend for anything. Very little stipends go around an elementary school. And your time for planning is far and few between. You're expected really to stay late or take it home. And my kids were in Rio Rancho when we moved here. My kids were in secondary school themselves. So I stayed at the school till 6 p.m. probably at the earliest. But anyway, so getting to Rio Rancho, I taught kindergarten. Then the next year was second grade. And I co-taught, and both of those were wonderful experiences where, I feel we really met the needs of the students, and both teachers were very focused on every child in their classroom, not just the general ed ones that without special needs. And then that fantasy I was talking about earlier came true. I was asked to be a reading recovery teacher, which is a national and maybe an international program. And I had to go to training one night a week for just about the whole year while I started that program, my third year in Rio Rancho. And you basically choose, they do all the testing at school in every classroom. And, you know, just to put it bluntly, the four students in first grade that have the lowest reading level get one-on-one instruction, half an hour a day, every day, with a reading recovery teacher. And that was lovely. And then in the afternoon, you have a small group of those that weren't quite the lowest, but are still way behind or way low in their reading level compared to grade level.
Right.
So those students, it was just such a pleasure. It was like my dream job. And I did that for 2 years and I was taught myself in the training. It was amazing because it's like introducing the book to the child, and they have a whole special library of books for those kids that the school district purchases through the National Reading Recovery Foundation or Association, whatever it is. And you introduce the books that are very high interest, beautiful, colorful pictures. They're not made for babies, because they know in making these books that they're for first graders. Right. And you might start them off with a book that just has one word per page, like when you're teaching, say, a 2 or 3-year-old to read. But and then it was just it made just such sense, and to have the special materials. So for example, when they worked up to a couple of levels, the book, you would go through it with them first and then say, let's look at the pictures this book is about, and you'd give them a background, and then you would point out like at least 2 words, and you'd say, look at this word, it might be a little tricky. And, the English language is so doggone hard and so many exceptions. So there might be a word that's, not spelled phonetically at all.
Right.
And you would say, this word is blah, blah, blah. And tell them this word is phone. But do you notice how it has a PH instead of an F? And, that's how we sometimes spell the F sound. Can you say phone? Can you put your finger under there and then you go through it, and then you have them read it to you, and then there's a recording sheet, and then for the mistakes they made, you might say, when we got to this page and you turn back to it and you say, you said blah, blah, blah. Does that make sense? And the kids like, no. And then you say, what do you think that says? Let's try it again. And the kids loved it. I loved it. It was truly my dream job.
And you saw him progress, right? I mean, that was part of
Yeah.
the fun, was watching a kid who was struggling
Mhm.
begin to progress and begin
Yes.
to improve,
Yes.
right?
And you had to send, you didn't have to, but each kid had a like a canvas specially made backpack with, a place to hold the label of their name. And they took it home at night. And of course, we met with the parents, and the agreement was, I'm sure they didn't always do it, but that the child read that book to them at home.
Right.
So they went home with a book every night and for the weekend. Weekends, I think we sent a couple of books home, and we did see them progress. And of course, we were highly um, required. There was a high requirement to do, their reading level, constant reassessment and testing.
Right.
So anyway, that was my dream job. And then the school, let's see, I can't remember what happened, but I think uh, they didn't need as many reading recovery teachers, maybe because I got transferred to a different school. That's what it was. And it was a brand new school that was newly built, and they didn't need reading recovery there. So then I did the co-teaching there again. And then my last 3 years of teaching, I was a literacy processing specialist, which I like to tell people just because it involves speech and everything, a literacy processing specialist. It's so much fun to say it that way. But anyway, that was small groups. So I
Right.
didn't have kids one-on-one, but we did have a very, pretty rigid reading curriculum for them. I cannot think of the name of the company right now that published it, but it included all these great high quality books and teacher script,
Right.
teacher activities. So like you would give them a word. Uh, well, I had a cat at the time, and I would buy the little cups of wet cat food, and then I'd wash them out, disinfect them. And so the night before class, you cut out vocabulary words to
Uh-huh.
emphasize, and then you'd have the students do different things with them, like put them in alphabetical order or put the words that start with B in one row or column, and they would manipulate those little pieces of paper that, they were like word cards, but I'd keep each one individually in one of those little gold cups for whatever brand that was that I bought for my cat. And that was really neat. I will say a couple of things I thought of that I would stick to again is I had, and my older brother Van had an extremely mean, evil, I think evil first grade teacher. And
Mm.
we both, I'm in my 60s, my brother is in my 70s, and we still talk about her. My
Wow.
brother will say, I had a nightmare. Mrs. Allison was in it. And she was a cruel, I said mean and evil. I think cruel is a better word for her. She was cruel. And they did not have kindergarten when I went to school in Alamogordo. So, but I was in school in first grade. They allowed me to go when I was 5 years old. And so I was just a little 5 year old, first year of school, and she was cruel. And I mean cruel. Do you want to know an example?
Yeah, sure.
Um, well, I have two. I probably because of her, I had a lot of anxiety. And my mom told me later that, I was this little girl, and I would wake up about 5 in the morning crying and begging her to not make me go to school,
Right.
which is not, I love to learn. So that was on her. But she, uh, my father died when I was very young, and my mom went into education and went into teaching. And back in those days, I walked to school all by myself. It was about probably 8 blocks away, if not more, 8 or 10 blocks away. But anyway, I get into her classroom and I was chewing my nails.
Yeah.
Out of anxiety, I'm sure she worsened it much more. I don't even know if I chewed my nails before her. And she kept telling me to cut it out and to quit. And then one day she pulled me to the front of the class and said, Jackie will not quit chewing her nails. And do you know how nasty that is? And then she told the other students in the class to raise their hand and tell me how ugly I looked chewing my nails and how nasty it was. And yeah, it was abuse, really. And I just stood there, you can imagine what's going through your mind. I'm surprised I didn't, pee my pants with that. And then she took it upon herself to buy that. Back then they had this
Hey,
horrible,
yeah, I know
bitter
what you're talking
nail
about.
polish so that your nails didn't taste good. And it didn't help me a bit because she just made me so nervous. And a second incident, which affects me to this day, is that she assigned us an art project, and it was something on a big piece of construction paper, the larger piece of construction paper. And I guess, and I remember being happy that we weren't having to, you know, listen to her lecture or whatever. And, you know, demean us. And anyway, I guess I didn't follow directions, and she came over and grabbed it off the desk and she said, "Class, I want you to look at this. Did Jackie do what I instructed you to do?" And nobody liked her, and there everybody was afraid, but a few of them were like, "No." And then she went and ripped it and said, "I'm throwing it in the trash where it belongs." And I have not liked doing art myself. I love looking at other people's art, but art makes me nervous, any kind of drawing. I
Well,
mean,
did,
she
did
was cruel.
did you tell your mom about it, or did you even have the?
My mom went to the principal. Obviously I was crying. She went to the principal, and he was pretty ineffective, that principal, very kind guy. And he told her, well, I think he was having trouble with my brother Van, who was in sixth grade that year. And of course, Van had also lost his father, and Van was, I think, kind of a bully. Well, I know he was a little bit and did some misbehaving. And he told her, he dismissed it and said, "I think she's nervous and upset because her brother Van is picking on her." And back then, mom was a teacher in the district in a small town, and you just didn't question the teacher or the principal that much. So
Yeah.
anyway,
And I
um,
think I think the other difficulty, of course, is um, we're from the same family. We're
yes,
from the same people, and our folks were. Of course, I never knew your dad, but I knew that my mother and father were very careful not to involve themselves too much in my relationships with my teachers.
right,
So there were times where I had really awful experiences and they stayed pretty much out of it. There were only a couple of them where daddy actually got involved. And it was partly because of that, we're in the same business, I'm in the same district, it's going to feel difficult. So, I think that may be part of it too. Um, and I think you're right. I think the other part of it is If the principal doesn't do something, this is the one place where the principal is the one that has to do it, or the supervisor. Some schools they have a lead teacher that does it, but in most public schools, the principal of the building is actually the evaluator of the teachers.
Right, right.
And so if the principal doesn't act, then the parents have to escalate to a higher level. And I think the inclination, especially in our parents' generation, was we'll just try to encourage her or encourage him and get them through it. And if the worst comes to the worst, we will escalate, but we're just going to hope that we can let them know, please take it easy. And I suspect that
My dog just opened the door.
that's okay.
He can.
I like your dog. I'm for your dog opening the door.
He's it's a like a French patio door, and it has the lever, and he learned to
To
you know
open it.
to up or to stand on his hind feet. You have to pull down the lever and pull, and he learned how to do that. So
But the other thing that I think is interesting about that and about you telling that story, I haven't talked about other teachers or supervisors yet. I have lots of stories,
yes,
both teachers that I had and teachers that I worked with, that I'll probably get around to telling. I'll have to change names for sure.
yes. I guess I
Uh,
didn't change names for her, but she
that's
deserves for
okay.
everybody to know. Her name
I'm,
was Mrs.
I'm sure
Alice.
she's gone. I'm sure she's gone now,
Yeah,
right?
she's very much gone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think, and a lot of us have encountered that are both in the business and are not in the business. The ones of us that are in the business encounter them in two arenas, which is you meet them as a student, and that's one experience. You meet them as a fellow teacher, and that's really gross.
yes,
Um, because you really get, I mean, I found myself getting really enraged when I'd find out that kind of thing.
yeah,
When a teacher was not playing fair
right,
or hurting children.
right,
And yeah, that's really difficult. That's a difficult thing.
yeah. It may have been a motivation for me to become a teacher and think I'm going to grow up. Of course, my mom was a teacher, so and it's in our genes, as you discussed with the McCollums and the Strattons, my other side of the family.
Yeah.
But I may have thought I'm going to grow up and be the nicest teacher, and I'm going to be, I'm never going to treat a student that way. And I don't think I ever did.
And
I
you know what?
prided myself on that.
I think that kind of thing was allowed more when we were kids. I think if a teacher pulled it now, it would land them in some real hot water.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
rightfully so. Rightfully
Yeah.
so.
I
Um,
wanted to say that it was extremely important for me to be a fair teacher and to treat all students with fairness. So a little trick I used from my first teaching year, that I read in one of those like elementary school teacher magazines that had
yeah.
lots of little ideas and lessons you could copy, was something I used throughout my years, you know, especially general ed, but even as a special ed teacher when I had a larger group, I took an old coffee can, decorated it with like gift wrap. So it was I think it had mushrooms and sunshines on it or something, suns. But anyway, I assigned each student a number and I just went alphabetically by last name. And then I just wrote in permanent marker on a popsicle stick, 1, 2, for as many students as I had. Put the popsicle sticks in the can. And then when I had, discussion, or if I needed a student to run an errand, or if I chose a student that got to do, a privilege or a fun thing. It was always random, not based on bias, completely unbiased. I would, pick up a popsicle stick and I'd say number 4. And it would only take me maybe a month of school to know immediately who number 4 was or who each number was with. But I would give that advice to secondary or elementary just to, because there's always, especially in elementary, you always have the students that are, call on me,
Yes.
especially the little, smart little girls,
Yes.
the smart
So,
little girls that want to show off how smart they are, or they might not even have the right answer, but they want to be teacher's pet.
yeah.
And always the little girls, call on me, call on me. And I would tell the students the first day, you're not ever going to raise your hands. Yeah, I'm not going to call on you. We don't raise our hands.